Welcome, everybody. We're so glad that you're here. My name is Simpson. I'm the Associate Director of Trust ILead. And for those of you who don't know very much about ILead, we are the Institute for Leadership Education in Engineering at U of T. And we offer a variety of programs and courses that are really about supporting you to discover your own leadership and to empower engineers to be leaders and to recognize their own leadership potential. So we're here to support you in learning about yourself, building stronger relationships, learning about change, learning how to lead change, and learning how to create a better world and live a meaningful and fulfilling life. So a couple norms for today's event. Natalia, if you could move the slide. Thank you. We want to encourage everyone to please keep yourself muted throughout the conversation, unless you are a panelist, of course. And we also wanted to let everyone know that this will be recorded. We have been recording our career talks, and previous talks are available on the ILead website for anybody who wants to go back and listen. Listen as you're walking, listen as you're moving around in your space. Those are available, and we will be recording today. And then finally, we really encourage your questions. We do have some time at the end of our session today for your questions. So please, as we go, if questions come to mind, put them in the chat. Milan will be aware of those questions, and we'll have time at the end to address a number of them. Okay. So before we get started, I wanted to offer a land acknowledgement. And today's topic is all about relationship building. And relationships, some of the key elements of strong relationships are empathy, respect, and reciprocity. So in the spirit of relationship building, we want to encourage everyone to think about both their immediate relationships, but also their relations and relationships on a much broader scale. And this is a land acknowledgement that acknowledges Canada's first people and acknowledges that settlers arrived and took the land that we are working on. So I want to just acknowledge that by reading this acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississauga of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. If you are curious about the Indigenous history of the land that you are on, you can check out this link and learn a little bit more about where you live or where you're calling in from and what the Indigenous history is in that area. Okay, so our agenda for today is I'm going to introduce our panelists in just a moment. Then we will have a good half an hour for a panel conversation, and then we will have opportunity to open it up to your questions. So let me start by introducing you to our amazing panelists, and it's really hard to keep these introductions brief, so I'll do my best here. Okay, so Rybo Chen, first of all. Rybo Chen is the Global Transformation Leader for the Digital Platform Support Organization at SAP. His vision is to change the world one conversation at a time. After facing multiple setbacks in his 20s, he is passionate about coaching and mentoring students and young professionals to accelerate their careers, live a balanced life, and become better leaders. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Computer Engineering, ECE 1T5 plus PEY for school speak. And some fun facts about Rybo. He is a two-time gold medalist weightlifter, and he runs a fast-growing Instagram account, which we encourage you all to check out, Invest with Rybo, where he spreads financial knowledge. So welcome, Rybo, and we'd love to hear where you're calling in from today.
Hi, everyone. I'm calling in from Vancouver, Canada, on the West Coast.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Our next panelist is Professor Oliosky. Allison Oliosky, and she is an assistant professor in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering and Troost ILead. She completed her PhD at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, studying product development decision-making during complex industry projects. Dr. Oliosky completed her Bachelor's of Science at Queen's University and her Master's of Science at MIT, both in mechanical engineering. She studies the processes and tools that teams of engineers use in industry as they design innovative new products. And some fun facts about Allison. This is an amazing fun fact. Allison knows every word to every song in the Hamilton soundtrack. So every word. I don't know. I don't even know what to say about that. Welcome, Allison. Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from downtown Toronto.
Awesome. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. And our third panelist, Madeleine Santia, is an IndE 1T7 plus PEY. She has 3 years of experience in data analytics within the technology industry. Madeleine has most recently been working at Flexport as an analyst, where she focuses on go-to-market and growth analytics. While at U of T, she was involved in ILead through course participation as a Leadership Labs facilitator, and she completed her undergraduate thesis with ILead. Maddie also served as Engineering Society's VP Student Life during her undergraduate years. And a fun fact about Maddie is that she has over 200 houseplants. Wow. Okay, so thank you all so much for being here. And we're gonna just kind of dive into this conversation. And the first question I have is for Rybo and then for Maddie. So when we think about building relationships between ourselves and managers and supervisors, we often put a lot of the responsibility on the manager or the supervisor, as we should. That's a big part, that's an important part of their role. But my question is, what have you done to proactively build a stronger relationship with a previous or current manager? So Rybo, I'm going to go to you first.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me here. I've had 7 managers in my career so far, reporting from a first line manager all the way to now I'm reporting to a senior vice president. And over the years, I've learned to help them get what they want, understanding what is meaningful to them and help them get what they want is my way of building relationships with them and providing value to them. A recent example is my boss really wants to be in that front runner first place amongst his colleagues, amongst his peers. So I just do whatever I can to help him maintain that front runner position. And that's how I continue to build relationships with him and get funding from him, because I help him stay in that front runner place. So that's my answer for that question.
Awesome. Okay, I want to follow up with you on that one, because that sounds like something that may have, that perspective is a really interesting perspective to maybe come back to. Maddie, how about you?
Yeah, I've had not so many managers just yet, but my last manager that I had, I found that we worked really well together, and I think that was largely in part due to kind of taking the time to be really flexible with her and understanding what her style of working was and kind of adjusting to that so that I could fit and help to observe some of her pain points and really resolve those where possible. And I found that to be the best way to have success in a role and to have a strong relationship with my manager.
So I hear in both of your responses a lot of empathy and a lot of kind of appreciation for the position that your manager is in and how to best support them. And I'm kind of struck by that. There's a lot of empathy there where it's not so much about the relationship serving your needs and really thinking about how can this relationship serve my needs too, but by serving their needs in a way. So that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Allison, I'm going to come to you and sort of in this topic as we think about managers and our expectations of managers and what it means to be a manager, and you are a manager. So I'm curious, as you've kind of had a little bit more experience, how do you see managers differently than you did when you were younger? And as a manager yourself, what do you think students might not realize about the position of the manager?
Yeah, great questions. And I'll start by saying that I think some of my students are actually attending here today. So hi, and in the spirit of what I'm about to say, please chime in with comments as you reflect on your experience of what I'm saying, because actually the first thing I want to talk about is just that when I was more junior, I think back to like my summer jobs and then my engineering internships, I really feared feedback. Like I actually, if I was, my ideal would be for me to just do my job and no one says anything. That would be better than somebody giving me feedback. And as I've grown in my career, at this point, actually, I really crave feedback, and I see the manager as a great person to give me feedback and from whom I should seek out feedback, and to a degree, whom I should provide a little feedback if I can find the appropriate time and place to do that. So that's one thing, kind of my changing perception of feedback. Another change that I've gone through is that also when I was younger, I guess I always thought of my manager as someone who could do my job, but just didn't have the time to do it and could do it better than me. And especially in academia, where I'm a manager now, where everyone is kind of working on a pretty niche project, and part of the goal is to develop these independent researchers. I'm actually realizing that often the student knows more than I do, has better gut instincts than I do on the problem, has more creative ideas on the problem, and they probably don't realize that when I meet with them, I'm learning from them and I'm trying to use my experience on other projects to help them, but they are really the captain and the expert. And then just one last thing I'll say is that when I was again doing my engineering internships or summer jobs, I felt like a constant struggle I was having was this debate over whether I was a burden when I was asking my manager for time, for check-in, for advice to help me with the problem, and like asking like I was asking, or feeling like I was asking way too many questions. And now I know that kind of like asking your manager questions is an inevitable part of the job, and that you can actually be thoughtful and sort of strategic about it. So it's not the choice between pestering your manager with questions and asking no questions. It's picking the right time to ask your manager questions, seeing if you can ask your peers questions. And maybe I'll talk a little going forward about asking questions or seeking out help in a way that demonstrates that you've really tried to solve the problem yourself. So yeah, that's my perspective change.
Okay, a lot of richness there. Okay, great. So my next question, and again, I hope we have some time. We're going to pull some of these threads together towards the end, I think, because there's so much good stuff coming out here. But my next question is for Maddie and then for Rybo. And it relates to sort of that power differential that that exists between an employee and a manager. And I'm curious how you both have navigated that, and in particular, how have you sort of respected the authority of the position that your manager is in while also stretching the confines of your own role? How have you kind of navigated that balancing act? So Maddie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think my answer 3 years ago is very different than my answer now. I think 3 years ago, to Allison's point, I was very much feeling like I was a burden to any manager I had. And so I was willing to jump however high I needed to accomplish whatever the task was. And I never voiced my opinion. But now that I'm a couple years out, I realized, and I'm now hiring people to work for me and my team, I realized that managers don't necessarily know any better than employees, and they hire us because they want our opinion and they respect our opinion and they respect us as workers doing the job that we were hired to do. And so I think one area that I've really learned is just feel free to voice your opinion and know that you can do that in a really respectful way, and it doesn't have to be scary or anything like that. But voicing your opinion and responding accordingly is really important, because otherwise you end up in situations where you kind of just do everything your manager says, and you don't have that voice. And I think it's a really important thing to build in your career.
Yeah, and voicing your opinion allows for a stronger relationship to emerge. I would imagine that as a manager myself as well, that it's hearing people's opinions is what makes for better decisions. So, so helpful to share opinions. Okay, thank you. And Rybo, how about you?
Yeah, I want to chime in too. I used to also feel burdened by asking my managers a lot of questions and feeling that I'm like a baggage to the manager. But then over time, my perspective shifted that when I'm asking questions, I'm helping the managers to understand where I'm confused, where I'm stuck, so that there's a two-way communication, as you said, to strengthen that relationship, right? But to the power dynamics, my approach may be a little bit different. Is I talk to my managers and I learn about their boundaries. I learn about what decisions can I make on behalf of them, and what decisions do I have to go to them to get approval. Then I embrace a mindset of asking for forgiveness is better than asking for permission. And I just stop asking them anymore. I go ahead and do whatever I wanted to do, as long as it aligns with the success criteria of the organization, aligns broadly with what my manager wants. I just go and do it. And I come back with some initial results to show them there's momentum here. Then I ask them, if you want me to continue, I need X, Y, Z funding to continue. And then I just talk to them that. The one test that I do is called a CEO test. Before I make any decisions or actions, I prepare myself in the event that the CEO calls me the next day. Can I back up my actions and decisions to that CEO? If I can do that, I move ahead and I don't care what's going to happen. I just move ahead, because like Maddie and Allison said, we're here to help the company. We're here to help the organization. And if we're always going around and asking for approval and questions, that slows things down a lot. So that's my take on the power dynamics.
Okay, appreciate that direct approach of asking your manager really specifically, like, where are the boundaries of my role? How do you see it? How do we get clarity on kind of where I have decision-making power and where I might need to consult? So that's really interesting. Okay. So sometimes we can be in situations where we have multiple managers, and it can be a little bit confusing of this manager really values this and this other manager really values this. So question for you, Maddie, I think you maybe have had this experience before. How do you balance having multiple people kind of overseeing your work and giving you feedback? Sometimes maybe even conflicting feedback.
Yeah, that's definitely, it's not that easy initially, but because of a lot of the nature of the work that I do, I work a lot with our executive team. And so you can imagine the CEO has a different opinion than the head of finance and so forth on like what sorts of numbers and things that they want to show and see. Mm-hmm. And so it can get really hard to kind of figure out where's the middle ground. And so what I typically do is I will work with my manager. This is where I really lean on that leadership role that my manager has. And I will work with him to make sure that my list of priorities makes sense, and work then as well with all of those stakeholders and getting them in a room together to talk through what the priorities should be. Because I think a lot of times folks will give us, someone in finance will give me this priority, and then our operations head will give me this other one. And a lot of times once they're in the room together, they recognize which is the actual priority and which isn't, because there's only one of me and I can't necessarily do all the priorities all at once. So I think having that conversation to reset and realign at the end of every meeting and with your manager is really good way to keep the lines clear of what happens next.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Before we move on, because we're doing pretty good with time, I just want to share a couple themes that I've heard and see if there are any sort of final comments that anyone didn't get a chance to speak about as we discuss these things. So I heard, some comments about helping your manager to get what they want as a perspective to experiment with. I heard also a little bit about flexing to the style of the manager, and we're actually going to talk about that in just a few minutes a little bit more. I heard about kind of shifting from feeling that asking questions is being a burden to realizing that asking questions is an opportunity to strengthen trust and to develop one's own expertise to then be able to contribute at higher and higher levels. And I learned about also, I heard you talk about sort of clarifying priorities together. So not sort of imagining that you can prioritize yourself or imagining that your manager knows that you are prioritizing in the way that they want, but kind of collectively, and Rybo, you spoke about kind of also collectively talking about boundaries and sphere of influence, sphere of decision-making. So are there any of those threads that anybody wants to like add a little bit more to, because they're all really rich?
I think I could talk a little bit about how, like Annie, you brought up trust, and in a way, I think trust might be one of the most important elements of a relationship with your manager. It needs to be built mutually. And it's kind of like built from a consistent pattern of working like in good faith.
Yes.
And it's going to take time to develop. And I think there's no secret ingredient to building up trust, but part of it is, like relationships in your own personal life, following through on the things you said you were going to do, or being transparent if you hit roadblocks. But also, you can't really build trust with someone without showing a little bit of yourself that you're comfortable to show. And I think that's different for everyone. Some people are really open at work and want to talk about their personal life. Some people are less so. But I think being conscious of the fact that everyone at work is a person, and you can talk a little beyond exactly the work you're working on, can help you build trust and also build that relationship with your advisor or manager.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that trust piece is so essential, so important, and enables for so much. Feels like if the foundation of trust is there, then there's so much possibility in the relationship, but also in terms of what can really take off in the organization. Yeah, any other comments, Rybo or Maddie, that you want to add about anything that we've discussed so far?
I just want to touch upon about reciprocity you mentioned earlier, Annie. Everything that you do when you build relationships with managers and help them get what they want, there's a law of reciprocity that I commonly use. Is whenever I help people, they tend to want to help you back easier, right? Mm-hmm. So help people provide value to your managers so that whenever you make an ask later on, they're more willing to help you back, right? So it's just down to the human to human connection, as Allison said. We're all humans and we want to help each other. So that reciprocity piece, yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay. So it's come up a tiny bit, a little bit more subtly, but something that maybe students who haven't had a lot of work experience yet, I wanted to talk about this idea of flexing to your manager. And students who've done the Bolton and Bolton kind of leadership styles workshop as part of a course or as a workshop might be familiar with this idea of recognizing that there's many different ways of leading. There's many different kinds of people who have preferences for different approaches. And sometimes we get a manager who's quite different from us, and we actually need to shift the way we approach things to make the relationship work or to support the completion of a project in the way that the manager really sees it should be completed. So the question is, so when we have to flex like this, it might mean that we have to work a little differently than is our preference. And we have to sort of make some adjustments and try some different ways of being on. So my question is for Allison and then for Rybo, can you share an example of a time where you had to flex your style with a manager or with a team? And what did you do differently and what did it teach you?
Yeah, I love this question because, as you said, Annie, this is a topic that is taught at Trust ILead, and I think students really resonate with it. But I think it is hard sometimes for especially students to understand, because I almost think you understand flexing more when you've had more managers, because then you see, oh, there's a bunch of different styles of management. There's not just one way to do things. So you'll get better as you work on it. But let me give you a couple examples from my life. So I did my master's degree with my advisor, who was like an older tenured professor. And I had meetings with him where he wanted to just sit in his office and, just talk. We talked a lot. We followed every rabbit hole. The hour would go by. He'd want to run over. Also, sometimes we would start our meetings late, and that was kind of his style. That's not my style. I'm pretty punctual. I'm pretty practical, I would say. And so I had to learn with my master's advisor, Warren, to both to flex to him, so to engage in these bigger picture conversations and to try to steer them a little bit. Also, though, to push my own, to try to get him to flex a little, to try to be practical at the end. It's because I needed my master's degree. But even in little ways, like, for example, Warren, my advisor, we'd have a meeting at 10 and he wouldn't show up until about 10:15. And so a behavioral change that I've made is that I have what's called like a Warren list, which is tasks that I can do on my phone or on my laptop really quickly in those 15 minutes when I'm waiting for him to meet. So I don't do them at other times. I do them when I'm waiting for Warren, when something's running. So then my PhD advisor, his name was Steve. He was punctual. He was scheduled. When I met with him for the first time and thought we were going to have a Warren conversation, he was like, oh, well, show me the data, or like, what paper are you talking about? Where's the citation? And it surprised me at first. And then I realized that it's just a different style of management. And so a very smart thing that I'm surprised I thought of was to say, okay, hey, Steve, in the past, when your students have presented to you, like what has a good student done to help you talk through your hour meeting? And he said, oh, some of my students have actually brought sort of like mini presentations. And so on the one hand, I didn't love that idea because it felt like I was like a consultant in a way. But on the other hand, every week I'd bring him, let's say, like 4 PowerPoint slides, really ugly, like not thoughtfully put together, that said, what I've been doing, roadblocks I've hit, and what I'm going to do next. And it was lovely. It structured our meeting. He could point to stuff and talk. And so, yeah, those are just flexes that I made both ways to really work well with both people. And I do now look back and think they both influenced me in different ways. And it's made me realize with my own students that I need to flex with them too. So I want to support my students equally and give them equal opportunities, but it's actually kind of silly to think that 10 of my graduate students would all flourish in the same style of meetings. And so I think it's made me more open-minded to thinking about flexing with them and to being more, trying to be more transparent with what I like so that they can flex to me. That was a long answer, but
thank you, Allison. Those are great illustrations of 2 very different styles and how you kind of adapted to both of them. Thank you. How about you, Rybo? Do you have an example you could share with us?
Yeah, and I'll try to keep my story short. We are all different. We see the world differently. Some people are visual learners, audio learners, same as our managers, right? Some of them like presentations, they like PowerPoint. Some of them like data. Some of them like you telling them stories. So it's really important to understand what they prefer, what is their preference. And I see that understanding them allows you to better communicate with them and build trust with them. An example that I have, and I always try to adapt to the person I talk to, was I was 2 months into my current role. So this was in mid 2019. And I'm still very new. I'm still exploring what my roles are, but there's a huge problem with the transformation project, internal transformation project, that costs more than $1 million. And everyone on the senior leadership team saw this was going to move forward. There was a go live that's going to happen in a month, but everyone else told me there's a huge problem. We can't continue. So then there was like a disconnect between senior leadership and the general employees. So I was like, okay, I need to go fix this. And at the time, I was scared to talk to this senior VP because he's my new boss. He's an authority, and I don't know how to talk to him. So I went in, I showed some empathy. I said, hey, you usually operate at the 50,000 feet view, right? So it looks like clear skies wherever you are. Everything looks great. But do you know what's happening on the ground? There's huge hurricanes coming. And do you see that hurricane from where you are? And he's like, no, tell me more about it. So I told him about what are the things I'm hearing and some of the obstacles. He took away with a new perspective that no one was able to convince him because of the way that people just told him things are wrong and heard it as excuses. But I came in, I showed him empathy, I helped him connect his part of the world to what's really going on. And we were able to really save that project from failing. So that was one of the examples that I had to flex and really think about how to structure that conversation so that the boss can understand what I'm trying to say.
That's great, Rybo. And it sounds like too, your approach there was one of educating rather than critiquing, like a genuine, like, how can I help this person understand what's happening down here that maybe they just don't have the ability to fully understand. So in a very helpful partnering kind of a way. That's great. Allison, back to you. Curious from a manager perspective, yourself, what are 3 things that you would urge students to avoid doing in their relationships with managers, and why?
Yeah. Can I make it a listicle? Let's see. So, so I think one, I mentioned at the start that I now am a big fan of feedback, reciprocal feedback. And I think that students should, when they get the opportunity to get feedback, try to listen to that feedback with an intent to understand, not to respond to the feedback. And actually, maybe that's true in all conversations. We should listen with intent to understand, not necessarily first to respond. It's really hard to do. But that would be one piece of advice. So seek out the feedback, but then don't take it defensively. I think another point I've brought up before is that, of course, you're going to hit roadblocks. Of course, you're going to face problems. In my context, you're doing research. The whole point of research is trying things no one's ever done before. And a lot of your paths are going to be dead ends. What's very frustrating for me is when I talk to a student about a problem and they just present the problem without even preliminary thoughts on what they might do to overcome it, or without trying something to overcome it. In my mind, that's the difference between like making excuses and facing challenges. And I'm on my students' team to help them solve a challenge. But again, because they're the expert in the problem that they're working on, I'd love to hear what they think we could try to solve the problem. And then, yeah, maybe this is more than 3 things, but I think in an ideal world, everyone would write a guide that's like how to work with me. So how to work with Allison. Like, I guess both Rybo and Maddie have mentioned being quite thoughtful and observant about what drives their manager. And, you know, same with me, noticing my advisor, what style they like. I would say to a student, don't be afraid of having those conversations, of just being upfront about it and saying, you know, what do you like to see? What has worked for you in the past with your other students, or talking to senior grad students and saying what seems to work really well. So not, you know, and of course your work is a problem to solve, but also your working relationships, if you have a mindset of continuous improvement and, you know, trying to get better, your working relationships are a problem to solve too.
Great. So Allison, that last point about kind of how, you know, reflecting that we could all have a little bit of a guide about how to work with me, it strikes me that those kinds of conversations are conversations that could happen annually, multiple times, like not so much a one-off, but a continuous sort of checking in. How are we doing? Are you satisfied with how we're working together? Am I satisfied with how we're working together? Do we have a sense of our goals being aligned? Is it, you know, that there's an opportunity there? And I also heard, Allison, you talk about kind of that there's a resourcefulness and an initiative that you want to see your students engage in before they bring a problem to you. You want them to have thought about it, put some time into it, put some effort into it, and kind of show that a little bit of that initiative is important. So yeah, just wanted to echo those things. We have a final kind of formal question, and then I have some surprise questions for you, just real quick, rapid fire surprise questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. So our last question, this is for Maddie first and then for Rybo. What might you do when you are looking for a job to investigate the leadership and management of a company or organization? Any tips for the students who are here today?
Yeah, actually, quite a few tips. I think this is the single most important thing that you can do when you're interviewing. I think first of all, the first thing that I always do is look at the company, at the org, and see if there's diversity amongst the executive team. See if the CEO is actually still the founder, because I found that having a CEO who was one of the founders creates this excitement that echoes throughout the entire company. And so that kind of trickles down. And I think that's really important. And you can always find out who works there through Crunchbase, whatever it might be. Another question I always ask is what their attrition rates are like on the team and in the org that you'd be rolling into. I think that's really important, because if there's an attrition problem, you don't want to find out about it when you join. Another question I always ask is, or a point I always make, is you're interviewing the company just as much as they're interviewing you. So when managers ask you questions about different behavioral things, I always turn it around on them as well and ask the same question, because I think that is a really clear way to understand the management style of your particular manager and the leadership style as well. And my last point would be, take a look at who's interviewing you throughout your interview process, because likely what you see or who you see represented in that panel can tell you a lot. Can tell you about their investment in the role. If there's not that many senior leaders interviewing you, maybe they're not really investing in this role. If there's not much diversity across the panel, I can tell you the second you get into the company, that's probably what the company looks like too. So I think those are a few tips, but really important to be really aware of that when you're looking for a job.
Awesome. It's great advice there. Thank you. Rybo, how about you? Anything to add there?
Yeah, it's a list of great perspectives and ideas. The one thing that I would add is checking for psychological safety. That's my top priority when I assess a new job or a new organization. Is I check with the leadership team or the management and learn about how they foster growth and how they help people embrace failures. And ask them to provide examples. Like, what is a recent example that you helped an employee go through a failure, try something new? And I talk to current or ex-employees, learn about their experiences about this type of topic, and just go on Glassdoor and just go on Google and search how people's perspectives of the company is, so that you get a sense of this company and their culture. Do they really give you that sense of psychological safety? Because I feel when we feel safe, that's where we can thrive. And it's important to look at that before you go work for an employer.
Great. Okay. So some final questions. These are kind of rapid fire questions, and I'm going to surprise you all with them. So no pressure. The first one is for Rybo. From your perspective, what are the two most important qualities in a supervisor?
Openness and empathy.
Nice. Okay. Allison, something that you do to boost your confidence when you feel uncertain.
Oh gosh, this is a great question. Listen to good music, but also, you know what, advice that I've heard a lot of junior faculty, so new professors, give each other is to save like a folder on your computer that's called like feel good, because we always take the bad feedback, in my case, the paper rejections, the bad student reviews, a lot more to heart than we take the good news. And so it's kind of a little bit selfish, but go into that folder and read those good messages and remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing when you're not feeling confident, and remind yourself that you can do it.
Awesome. Okay. Maddie, one of the best pieces of career advice you've ever received?
Oh, that's a tough one. Gotten a lot of good advice lately. I think the best piece of advice is to ask questions, and I think that we definitely undervalue that. There's a certain amount of initiative you should put into things before you ask a question, but feeling free to always ask. It's a lot better than spinning your wheels trying to figure something out and not getting there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Allison, top 3 things that students should look for in a work environment.
Yeah. Okay. I loved Rybo's answer of psychological safety, and to break that down a little bit, that means, you know, do you get a sense that people are willing to take risks and put themselves out there, come up with new ideas, speak openly, be themselves on a team? What did you ask again, Annie? Environment?
Environment. So psychological safety, top 3 things students should look for in a work environment.
Psychological safety, yeah, I think, what else? I think a really easy one is just a sense of feeling welcomed in the environment. Like that's an initial one you can feel. Do people greet you and warmly in the interview? Because that shows that they have empathy for someone coming into a new scary place. And then do you feel like you can learn from other folks on the team? Is there a learning environment with your peers and your manager? Yeah.
Great. Okay. Last one, and this is for Rybo and then Maddie. What do you need in your life to be happy in your work?
Autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Learning. Always be learning. If I'm not learning, I pretty much leave at that point, to be honest with you.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you all so much. So I'm curious what's been going on in the chat as we've been having this rich conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, and there might be some opportunities to pick up some of the threads that we've explored. Milan, I'm wondering if you can share some questions that have come up.
Yeah, we've had about 5 or 6 questions. We'll see how many of them we can get to. But the first one is, to managers or leaders, what are some ways to ask for feedback that makes it easier for you to come up with feedback or help provide us with more constructive feedback?
I can start with that one. So I think feedback is really hard to give on the spot, especially if you're like me and I'm conscious of wanting to give constructive feedback. There's all sorts of strategies that talk about like a feedback sandwich, you know, like good things, bad things, good things. So I'd say it's almost like setting expectations with your manager. So bringing it up and saying, you know, it's been a while since I've had feedback. Do you think in the next month we could set aside one of our one-to-one meetings to talk about feedback or something like that? I think it's also great and shows initiative if you say, I've also done some self-reflection, and I think I could bring to you some areas of growth that I've seen in myself and maybe get your perspective. Because again, sometimes managers are busy, and you showing that initiative can help them have a start and will hopefully help them remind themselves that part of their job, a good manager, should be to help you grow and get better.
I can share too, as a manager, that I find it really easy to give positive feedback, and the people that I work with are all amazing. So there's lots of really positive feedback to give. When needing to give more constructive feedback, maybe this echoes Allison, there's a little bit of time that needs to be taken, and there's some pre-reflection that needs to happen. And it just takes a little bit more time to even figure out what the request might be, or what the different behavior might look like, or whatever it might be. There's a lot of thought. So I think asking for giving some advance notice or making a request and giving your manager some time is always a really good idea. Okay, how about another question?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. How do you talk to your manager in circumstances where you might find yourself unmotivated or disliking some parts of your job?
I think I can take that one. I've had that conversation recently, actually. It's really tough. I don't know. I kind of blame it on being Canadian a little bit, that we're not always super direct. We're worried about, not disappointing somebody. But what I like to do is bring it up slowly. So the second I start feeling like I'm bored or I'm unmotivated or I'm not learning and not enjoying what I'm doing, I bring it up to my manager in our one-on-one, and I just kind of lay out how I'm feeling. I try to lay it out constructively, although it can be kind of difficult. It depends on your manager. They can take that as a personal offense sometimes. That's what I've found. And I just try to lay it out nicely, and then from there, it helped to propose things that I'm excited about, that I want to work on. And if my manager doesn't make that investment in finding time for me to work on those projects that I've proposed, then that tells me that maybe it's time to move, or time to find another role internally, something else that excites me.
Great. I hear that, Maddie, there's also that kind of initiative there of sort of proposing what some alternatives might be. So you've spent that time, you've thought about it, you're bringing some other possibilities to the table, which I think is really, really helpful. Okay. What else, Milan?
Another question that was for Rybo specifically, actually, but I'm sure others could chime in on. How do you go about figuring out what your boss truly wanted? And Rybo mentioned being a front runner, and the person asking the question said this sounds like a personal goal rather than an organizational goal. So do you explicitly ask about your boss's personal goals? How do you go about figuring that out?
Right. So let me just clarify a bit. The front runner means being in the front of all the KPIs, all the key performance indicators we look at in the organization. How I go about is I ask the manager, what is the vision? What is your vision of the team? What is your vision of the organization? What direction do you see our team heading towards to? Direction the organization is heading towards to? And then practice that active listening, and just listen where the energy comes up, where the passion comes up. And for me, the manager was, I really love to be in the front. And he mentioned it many, many times. So I picked it up as, okay, that's my guiding principle. So whatever I do, as long as I can make him stay in the front, then he won't have anything bad to say about me. So that's kind of how I would approach it.
Can I chime in there, Annie?
Please.
Yeah, I love hearing this. And I guess I'm reflecting on the fact that I think it sounds like Rybo has a great manager and is thoughtful, and if he was a manager, and it sounds like Maddie has a great manager and would be thoughtful as a manager. And I think I want to bring up the fact that it's not always the case, especially when we're first looking for jobs. Sometimes we can't be as choosy. And sometimes we end up in an engineering or other organization where, we don't have a good manager. People don't really go to school to become a manager. So, actually Rybo made me think of this because speaking of KPIs, key performance indicators, when I was in undergrad, I did an internship at an engineering organization where I felt like the KPI for my performance was my butt in the seat. And it kind of drove me crazy. Like at the time, I didn't have a car and I wasn't living in the city of my work. And so I had to carpool to work. And so my hours were essentially fixed. I put in my hours, but my boss wanted me to stay late. And it felt like for no reason other than to say his team was staying late. And it didn't feel like I could kind of like solve that problem. And so in that case, I ended up, not being able to really please him on that. I did my best work in the normal hours. At the end of my work term, he did this little evaluation where he checked me like highly on every single box except some box where he could say like I wouldn't stay late. And it just became for me like something it was a lesson to learn. And I think sometimes when you're in a bad position with a bad manager, you have to remember that you can't always solve it. You don't want to flex and lose yourself. And so sometimes you have to do something else, get something else out of the job, work on your skills, but take care of yourself too, and start networking, start looking for other opportunities. And yeah, so we're not always in a great position with managers, and but I hope they get better and better with the way I think engineers, for example, are becoming more open-minded to the fact that leadership and teams matter.
Thank you, Allison. Really glad you raised that important angle on things. Great. Milan, were any other questions?
We still have a host more, so maybe I'll share the next one and we'll see what our time looks like after this one. With respect to building trust, the person asking this question has noticed a certain balance between kind of being professional and being personal with a manager. So the question is, how do you find that balance with your manager, and how do you bring up the conversation about boundaries without either seeming too persistent or coming across as unprofessional?
Great question. Is anyone burning to get in there?
I'd love to hear your perspective, Amy, if no one else is burning on it.
Yeah, I would say maybe don't have your first conversation be about boundaries. Maybe take a little bit of time to build up a little bit and test the water. So start by asking a couple of simple questions. Where did you grow up? What do you love about working here? What kind of roles have you had previously? Ask those kinds of, show curiosity and see how your manager responds to that. And if they seem to be able to answer those questions and interested in answering those questions and ask you similar questions, that is a great indicator that a relationship can be more expansive than just a straight up kind of more task-oriented relationship. So I would start there and build up. And once there's a bit more trust, you could have more significant conversations about where do you see the boundaries of your role ending and the boundaries of my role ending, and help me prioritize in ways that don't overstep. And you can kind of get into that a little bit more. So, yeah.
I would maybe add to that just a bit, just because I'm in a situation right now where my manager is not interested in a personal relationship at all. And so that doesn't mean that you can't still have that boundaries conversation, though I agree with Annie that it shouldn't be your first conversation or maybe even your second, but it's definitely still an important conversation to have, even if your manager doesn't want to talk about personal things.
Great. Okay. Can we squeeze another one in, or maybe even two?
Here's an interesting one. How do you recognize a manager that will advocate for you and is actually invested in helping you grow?
Rybo, I wonder if you have a response to that.
I'll try. I think a manager, when he or she spends time with you, provides feedback to you, that's a sign that the manager is advocating for you, because they're spending time to reflect on how to make you better. There are a lot of things that happen beyond the scenes that they don't usually say, and I'm usually in those conversations to hear what managers talk about behind the scenes. And the sign is they come to you, they help you understand how you can get better and help you develop your career. Those are signs that these managers are advocating for you.
Great. Okay. All right. So I think we have a poll that we want to launch before we close today.
Launching it now. It's an anonymous poll.
Okay.
There we go. Just help us collect a bit of feedback on the session. Thank you guys very much.
Yes. All right.
We'll just give it a couple minutes while the numbers come in.
Perfect.
A couple more people are participating. Thank you so much. It's super helpful to get some feedback, as we talked about in the session.
So
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so I really want to just thank everyone for joining us today. This was a great conversation, and thank you to our 3 panelists for joining us, 2 on West Coast time and 1 Toronto time. Thanks all for being here, and we look forward to our next career talk, which and some encouragement too. If you would like to get more involved in ILead, understand and know about future programming that we're offering, listen to our podcast, which is super cool. And there'll be more episodes coming out over the summertime. Check it all out. And our next career talk will be on influence. And that will be on June 24th at 12 o'clock. So we hope to see you back for that. Okay.
And if you scan that QR code on your screen, it'll take you to the spot where you can sign up for the newsletter and see a really quick overview of all the ILead programs that we offer also throughout the year.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks everybody so much. See you next time.